It's working? Yes. All right. So we have a slightly different layout. We'll work with it. I'll get a longer cord and figure out what's wrong with the power system. But in the meantime, we get to go to our own power system, our own recharging system, the concept of Shabbat. Now, in English, usually people call Shabbat the Sabbath. But I tend to prefer the Hebrew word Shabbat because it comes from the original root, which means to rest or to cease something. And that's why it's called Shabbat. It's not a random word. It's not a made-up word. It comes very cleanly from the original Hebrew. But what is Shabbat? Well, we're going to explore this in a few different ways over the course. But what I want to start off with is the idea that in Shabbat, there are things that we don't do and things that we do. And by choosing some activities and prohibiting other activities, what we are essentially doing is moving things aside to create a special space, a special time, that if we miss part of that, if we only worry about what we're not supposed to do, or if we only worry about what we're supposed to do, Shabbat doesn't have the same feeling, it doesn't have the same effect, we're not doing it right. So we're going to start off this week with the things that we should do for Shabbat. Okay. And then next time we'll talk about the prohibitions. Sometimes the prohibitions people get caught up on, and they forget that the prohibitions are not about, it's not about like, restrictions and rules. It's about making space. It's about making things clean for having it. It's like almost like the prohibitions, if you were a doctor, you don't go to do surgery when your hands are dirty, right? That's a requirement. That's a limit. You don't do surgery outside. You got to do it inside a building where everything has been taken care of. So the prohibitions are a little more complicated, so we'll deal with those next. But today we're going to deal with the things that we should be doing, the required actions, rather than the things that we can't do. All right, so with that in mind, let's remind ourselves of where we do this. Well, in traditional Jewish reading, we talk about these positive things, these active things that we do, these additions. We talk about that as coming from the idea of remembering Shabbat. Zachor is one of the ways that God gives us the Ten Commandments and gives us the thing of Shabbat. It says, observe Shabbat and keep it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Shabbat of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox, your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to do Shabbat. So we get a number of different things from this passage. One of them is, of course, that there is a feeling of Shabbat, that we are remembering that we were a slave. And because we remember what that is, we need to not only give freedom on Shabbat to our own servants, but we also need to remember that if we work 7 days a week, it's kind of like we're a slave still, right? If there's never a break, it's as though we are still a slave. We may be a slave getting a paycheck. We may be a slave, getting health insurance. But if there's never a stop, then we are still working endlessly for some earthly master. And that's something we need to remember. But remembering Shabbat is not just about being free. It's about how do you make freedom a positive experience, right? Freedom should not only be, I don't have a master. Freedom should be, I don't have a master, therefore I can. And that's the part that Shabbat is also trying to draw our attention to. So, Zachor, which is in the Exodus 20 version of the Ten Commandments, and Shamor, which is in the Deuteronomy 5 version of the Ten Commandments, were pronounced in a single utterance, an utterance which the mouth cannot utter, nor the ear hear. So this is a teaching from the Talmud, which is trying to reconcile. Why is it that in one version of the Ten Commandments, it says that you should Zachor Shabbat, which means to remember, and in the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments, it says you should Shamor Shabbat, which means to guard or keep, to observe in a more protective sense. So why have those two things? Well, first of all, we have to understand it's not that God forgot what he had said when he did the Exodus version and changed the verb in the other. The Talmud is trying to tell us that both Zachor and Shamor came from God at the same time. That God didn't just say one word, God said two words. Now, a mouth can't do that, right? If I say Zamor, if I say Zachor, I can't say Shamor, right? It's my mouth only gets one word at a time. Even if I'm tongue-tied, it just means I say them badly. I can't say two words simultaneously. I'm not God, right? That's one of my limitations among the many. So what the sages are trying to teach us is that we need to pull apart the different layers of what God has tried to tell us about Shabbat and be able to hear them each separately, but they are both equal. That was dramatic. Ah, dear. I hope no one who was watching at home has gotten sick from seeing it plummet forward. Let me just double check that I'm still aimed roughly square. I'm not going to worry too much about my camera angle, but I don't want it to be off completely. All right, good. I have to redo the base. Where was I? We have to make sure that we pull them apart so that we can understand both individually. And there isn't that one is more important than the other, right? They are both equally important. So again, although a lot of people really, really get caught up and focus on all of the don't do stuff for Shabbat, this is an equal component of Shabbat. It's not the leftover. Oh. Okay, so we have the two ideas of Zachor, remember, and Shamor. But actually, when we talk about Shabbat in the fullest way throughout Judaism, we use 4 different words. So this is taken from Hilchot Shabbat, from Rambam's Mishnah Torah. And as usual, he gives a great summary. There are 4 elements to Shabbat, 2 originating in the Torah and 2 originating in the words of our sages, which were given exposition in the prophets, in the Nevi'im. In the Torah are the commandments, remember and observe, Zachor and Shamor, which we've talked about. Given exposition by the prophets are honor, the word kavod, and delight. All right, you're getting to be annoying now, which is the word for delight. Oneg is the word that is used for that. That we should both honor Shabbat and we should delight in Shabbat. You know what I think the problem is? I think that when I move that chair, it's got more weight pulling on these. So if I take the weight off, maybe it'll stop throwing itself forward at me. Let me just double check that we're still lined up. Close enough. Okay. So these 2 concepts, says Rambam, right, come from the teaching in Isaiah. If you refrain, says Isaiah, from trampling the Sabbath, from Shabbat, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, if you call Shabbat delight, oneg, and if you, the Lord's holy day, honored, kavod, and if you honor it and not go your ways, nor look to your affairs, Isaiah goes on to say, this is what God is looking for. So it's not only that God wants us to avoid our activities. God wants us to do certain activities that make us rejoice on Shabbat. Shabbat should be a happy time. It's not meant to be a prison cell. It's not meant to be, I don't get to go out and work today. It is supposed to be, I can't work, but I can have these other delights and I can give honor to the day of Shabbat. And that's what our tradition then tells us to do. Because what is meant by honor? What is meant by kavod? Well, again, taken from Rambam, this refers to our sage's statement that it is a mitzvah for a person to wash his face, his hands, and his feet in hot water on Friday, the beginning of before Shabbat begins, in honor of the Sabbath. He should wrap himself in tzitzit, the talit, right? And he should sit with proper respect, waiting to receive the Sabbath as one goes out to greet a king. This is a very important and powerful metaphor, which is when you're getting ready on Friday afternoon for Shabbat, you shouldn't just think, I got to get everything done, because Shabbat's coming and then I can't do anything. You should instead be thinking, I got to get everything done because when my guest arrives, I won't be able to do this because I'm going to be too engaged and too happy with meeting my guest. And before they arrive, I have to make sure I look good. I have to make sure the house is right, because you don't want some important person like a king coming into your house when it's just And Shabbat, we should feel as though that is what is happening, right? It's not about, oh no, I don't have any more time left. It's, oh no, I'm about to receive this amazing visitor. I better be ready. The sages of former generations would gather their students together on Friday, wrap themselves in fine robes, and say, come, let us go out and greet Shabbat the king, right? Or as we now do it, we call Shabbat as a kala, and you may know the song Lecha Dodi, right? Lecha Dodi likrat Shabbat, right? Come, my beloved, and let us greet Shabbat. This metaphor of going out to greet Shabbat, of not waiting for Shabbat to come to you, but it's like when I was growing up, we had a very long driveway, and when you had a special person coming to visit, you would hear the sound of their car coming down the driveway. You didn't sit in your living room. You ran to the door and you opened the door and you came down the stairs to watch them drive in so that you could walk with them into the house the last few feet. You didn't just wait for them to ring the bell. And that should be our attitude, our excitement at greeting Shabbat. So among the ways of honoring the Sabbath is wearing a clean garment. One's Sabbath garments should not resemble one's weekday clothes. People will often ask me, say, Rabbi, is it okay if I come to the synagogue if I'm wearing jeans? Is it okay to come to the synagogue if I'm wearing a t-shirt? And the truth is, yes, I would rather have you in the synagogue than not. If the difference is the dress code, then by all means come and be in the synagogue. But on Shabbat, you will not be in the same frame of mind. You will not be in the right mood if you wear whatever you would normally wear on a non-Shabbat day. And that is part of the transition that a person makes. They say, clothes maketh the man. And there is some truth to that. I feel different when I wear a tie and wear a dress shirt than I do when I wear a t-shirt. And when I'm on Shabbat, I need to feel differently. And so that's when I always wear my nicest, suits, and when I wear my nicest socks and my nicest tie and all that. It's a definite upgrade from the work week. And that is, in our clothing, a way of showing honor. It's not the only way to show honor, but it's a great example. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. But what about this word oneg, this word delight? Well, again, taken from Rambam, a person must prepare a particularly tasty meal and pleasantly flavored drink for Shabbat. All of this must be done within the context of a person's financial status. So Rambam's telling us you don't bankrupt yourself, right? You don't go out and buy like the most expensive steak ever if you can't afford it.
Yeah.
But how we eat on Shabbat, or how we do other things on Shabbat that give us pleasure, by lining that up with Shabbat, it makes the Shabbat a richer experience. It makes us happier to see the day. And then that also allows us to prepare more spiritually. I know a lot of people think that there's no spirituality in the stomach, but that's not true, right? Our soul is in our body, and they're connected. They're working together to do their job. And so the happier the body is, the easier it is for the soul to be happy. I mean, there are some limits to that. That's not 100%, but we do need to make sure that the body is at peak happiness of the acceptable types of pleasure that when we are celebrating Shabbat. So the meal you have on Shabbat should usually be the nicest meal you have all week. And the food that you serve on Shabbat should be your favorite dishes, so that you feel great about how you're having that time. As Rambam goes on to say, the more one expends for the Sabbath and in preparation of many good foods, the more praiseworthy it is. If, however, this is not within one's capacity, you can't afford to do that, even if one merely stews food or the like in honor of the Sabbath, this is considered the Sabbath of light. So the idea is take whatever you do during the week and raise it up, right? If Monday through Friday, daytime, you normally just eat food. On Friday night and Saturday day, that's when you upgrade. For the ancient world, a lot of people, they didn't eat much meat. Friday would be a good time to have meat, right? That way it gives it a special feeling. I like to say to people now, if you're on like a diet and you don't want to eat cake and you don't want to eat candy and all of that, great. Do it on Shabbat, right? Make Shabbat your cake day. Make Shabbat the day you have ice cream. Make Shabbat the day when you have that little extra something that makes the day feel delightful. and gives it that extra flavor. Don't just blow it on a Thursday. Don't do it on a Monday. Do it on Shabbat. One is not obligated to strain oneself or to borrow from others in order to prepare more food for Shabbat. The sages of the former generation said, make your Shabbat as weekdays, but do not depend on others. Meaning that if you really can't afford to upgrade your Shabbat, you don't go and put it on the credit card. Right? You don't go and borrow it from someone else that you have to pay back. Right? If you have to, just make Shabbat like a regular day and just eat rice. And if that's all you got, you just eat rice. But you shouldn't make yourself dependent on others. You shouldn't go into debt to upgrade it. So very, very sensible. And one more thing that he points out based off the teachings of our sages, sexual relations between loving spouses is considered a dimension of Shabbat pleasure. This is also oneg. Again, as I mentioned, our bodies and our souls, they work together. And when our body is happy, our souls are able to find spiritual happiness more easily because the body isn't bothering it. And this union between, the loving spouses is definitely a source of general pleasure. And on Shabbat, it is also especially favorable. Good? Okay. Seudah Shlishit. So this may sound a little unusual. A person is obligated to eat 3 meals on Shabbat, 1 in the evening, 1 in the morning, and 1 in the afternoon. So first of all, a reminder that we begin all of our holidays at the night before. So for example, Shabbat begins Friday evening, and then it continues all the way till the next night. So Shabbat ends Saturday night. And what the sages told us is that you should have a meal Friday night. You should have a meal Saturday, morning, midday, after you've done morning prayers. And then you should have a meal in the afternoon. Yeah, that's called a normal life, right? For us. Historically, that wasn't the case. Historically, people had 2 meals a day. Right? So they had their evening meal and they had their morning meal. And they didn't take as long to do their services as us. So their morning meal didn't come at noon. They would come earlier in the day because they would start their services at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. And we start ours at 9:30. It's very relaxed. And that was it. And so you'd have that sort of mid-morning, midday meal, and then you'd have your evening meal. And that was the only meals you had for each day. And that was normal for every day of the week, except Shabbat. On Shabbat, the sages say, have an extra meal. And again, this is part of that basic sense of if you make Shabbat extra, that you are actually full on Shabbat. You actually feel that you've eaten enough. You feel satiated. That is going to help you experience Shabbat better. Because one of the things that the restrictions of Shabbat do, which we'll talk about in another class, is it reminds us that we should feel full. We should feel done. Right? So many of the restrictions are about not doing our work, trying to change and make and do and all of those things. And one of the things that happens is if you stop all of that, you can actually let yourself feel, you know what? I've done something, right? I feel accomplished. I feel finished. And yeah, there's more work, on Sunday. But for right now, I'm looking around and it's things, nothing needs me to do it right now at this minute. Which again is mimicking the idea of when God finished all of creation and God stopped. It wasn't because God was tired. It was because God was trying to model for us the idea that sometimes you need to just stop and check out what's been done and appreciate what's already been finished, not thinking about tomorrow I will, tomorrow I must, tomorrow I'll make. You don't need to always think about that. You need at least one day where it's just, I'm going to enjoy what I got. And having that third meal is a good way of keeping you from thinking about when am I going to eat again? When am I going to eat again? When am I going to eat again? Which for most of our history was a bigger problem. Nowadays, people are more worried about not eating too much. Back then, people were worried about not eating enough. Oh, sorry. And why do we have that as well? It's not only to make us feel full, but the rabbis derive that from Exodus 16, verse 25. And Moses said, when he's talking about the manna, right? Eat it today, for today is a Shabbat to the Lord, and tomorrow you will not find it in the field. right? So it's today, today, today. We get 3 mentions of today. Therefore, we assume there are three meals that go along with Shabbat. Just checking there's no technical problems. Perhaps the most famous sign of Shabbat is the lighting of the Shabbat candles, which is a little bit of a confused matter, because the lighting of the Shabbat candles, we don't light the candles on Shabbat. We light the candles for Shabbat by lighting them before Shabbat, because one of the restrictions we'll talk about is no making fire. So if it is already Shabbat, there's a moth in the room. If it's already Shabbat and the sun has gone down, then we do not light the candles, even if we had forgotten to. Because once it's Shabbat, we're not striking matches. That's why Shabbat is very hard for smokers, because they got to go a full day without taking a puff. So why are we lighting candles before Shabbat, and why make this such an important part of our Shabbat preparations? Well, again, Rambam, great guy. I can't say it better than him, so I'll let him talk. The kindling of the Sabbath lamp, and it used to be, of course, oil lamps, not candles, but our candles are much better than theirs now. The kindle of a Sabbath lamp is not a matter left to our choice to only do if you want. So he's trying to make sure, because some people said, well, if you want to have light, go ahead and light it. If you don't want to have light, don't light it. And he's like, no. This isn't optional. This is required, right? Nor is it a mitzvah that we are not obligated to pursue, right? Meaning you should do it if possible, but you don't have to make it possible, right? Which is technically like, for example, wearing a talit, where if you have a cloak, then it needs to have 4 fringes on it. And if you don't have to go out and buy one. I should point out that we all do. But the Shabbat candles is a different level altogether. It is instead an obligation, meaning you need to have the things there and you need to light, right? Both men and women are obligated to have a lamp lit in their homes on Shabbat. A lot of people misunderstand this. They think, oh, women are the only ones who do Shabbat candles. No, it is customary to let the woman of the house light the candles. But when I was a bachelor and didn't have a woman in the house, so to speak, I lit the candles and I needed to light the candles. And even if we are, together, if my wife is ill or not feeling well, then I'll light the candles. I won't say, well, that's women's work. No, it's a mitzvah for everyone in the house. We just give first dibs to the women. Even if a person does not have food to eat, he should beg from door to door and purchase oil to kindle a lamp, for this is included in the oneg of Shabbat. This is very, very strong, right? He's saying, yeah, even if you're having to beg for food, you also need to light a lamp, even though that may seem like a waste, right? Just go to sleep if it's dark. What he's trying to point out is that having light in your home at night is a joy for the soul. And if you've ever been somewhere where you didn't have electricity and you didn't have a flashlight and you didn't have candles and you didn't have anything, and the sun goes down, it's dark and it is depressing. And if you've ever been in those circumstances and then you suddenly find a flashlight, or you suddenly find, the old emergency lamp, during when the power's out, and you turn it on, the human soul just feels so much more relaxed when knowing that there is light. Yeah. It is almost impossible to completely relax when you just watch it get darker and darker until you can't see anything. And so he points out one is obligated to recite a blessing before lighting, as one does before fulfilling any obligation incumbent upon us by virtue of rabbinic decree, which is why we do say the Asher Kiddishanu, the blessing. Every movie you'll ever see that ever has Jewish people who are at all observant in them is going to show them lighting the candles, and you're going to see the person lighting the candles wave their hands and cover their face. And if you ask 95 Jews out of 100, they will tell you that's because that's what they learned. They can't give you an explanation. And that's because it is a custom that doesn't have a clear history of why. But there are explanations. So The customs of waving one's hands over the candles and covering one's eyes are not directly mentioned in ancient sources, right? Meaning if you look in Rambam, he doesn't talk about doing that. If you look in the Talmud, no one talks about doing that. But the reason why we do it are most likely, and again, we don't have this in the ancient books, so we can't say 100%, but probably these are the reasons. One, the waving. This allows us to focus our thoughts before saying the blessing, and the action mimics our spirit, drawing in the spirit of Shabbat. You'll notice that people always wave like this. They don't wave like they're doing the breaststroke, right? They're waving towards themselves. And you'll also notice it's most common that people will wave 3 times to parallel the 3 parts of our soul, the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama, right? The 3 different levels of our spiritual being. So that threefold blessing makes sense in that respect. Covering, why bother doing this? Well, we wish to say the blessing before we enjoy the lights that are designated for Shabbat. By covering while reciting the blessing, we put blessing and action in the proper order. Right? So here's the problem. It's, if I light the candle, boom, it's lit. Well, I didn't say the blessing, right? And if I say the blessing first and the candles aren't lit, then what am I saying the blessing over, right? So the idea was you would light them, cover, say the blessing, Baruch Atah, and then, bam, there it is. Now you get to enjoy the light after having said the blessing. And so that puts it in the proper order. Now, not every community has this custom. It is the most widely held Ashkenazic practice, but not every community around the Jewish world does exactly like this. But definitely this is what you'll see most commonly. Yes. Shalom Bait, which literally means peace or harmony of the home. Said Rabbah, again, this is taken from the Talmud. It is clear to me, if someone can't afford both and has to choose between a lamp in his house and a lamp for Hanukkah, the lamp for his house takes precedence for Shalom Bait, for peace in the house. If he has to choose between a lamp for his house and wine for saying a prayer of sanctification, the Kiddush of the holy day, a lamp for his house takes precedent for Shalom Bait. So why Shalom Bait? How does a lamp bring peace? Well, again, remember what I said about being in the dark. It's bad enough to be alone and in the dark with no light, but imagine being with other people. It is awkward, quite bluntly, to have to fumble around in the dark while everything has gone dark with your spouse or with your kids. It is very hard to interact with other people when it gets dark. It's a practical concern, and when it's difficult, and when you're tripping over other people, and when you're dropping things and all of that, people, they don't have the best attitude. They don't have the best feeling, right? Mm-hmm. People get edgy. They get angry. They get impatient. Having light removes all of that, right? All of a sudden, I'm not tripping on someone. All of a sudden, I can hand them things and it's no problem. All of a sudden, I can see them when we have a conversation or when we're eating a meal. That's necessary for peace. Judaism is a very spiritual religion, but it's also very practical. And so making sure that you have that basic setting where there can be peace is job number one. Because if you don't have the right setting, even with a good heart, it's hard to make peace. Kiddush, as I mentioned a second ago, Kiddush is the special blessing we do over the wine. It is a positive commandment from the Torah to sanctify the Sabbath day with a verbal statement, as implied by Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it, right? Remember it with praises of its holiness. Yes. This remembrance must be made at Shabbat's entrance, Friday night, and its departure. At the entrance with the Kiddush that sanctifies the day, and its departure with Havdalah. That happens Saturday night after 3 stars come out. So that means that you need at least 2 cups of wine minimum for Shabbat, but we also do an extra Kiddush during the middle of the day. Which you'll know we do right after we finish our service here on Saturday mornings. And this Kiddush is there as our declaration that this day is holy, right? When we start the day, we're saying, all right, we're starting the day now. It's holy. Go, 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 go. Reminder in the morning. Go, 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 go. And now at the end, all right, that was holy, but now it's done. And now we're back into regular time. And the wine gives us a bracket, and the blessings give us a bracket for the whole day. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And how does it actually recite? What do we say? Well, this is the translation.
Mm-hmm.
So we start off by giving the blessing for the wine itself. Baruch, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. But then the second paragraph is the important one for Shabbat. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and hoped for us and with love and intent invested us with his sacred Shabbat as a memorial for the deed of creation. It is the first among the holy festivals. Shabbat is always listed first in any list of Jewish holidays, commemorating the exodus from Egypt. So we get two explanations in the Kiddush. One, Shabbat reminds us of creation, and two, Shabbat reminds us of the exodus. For you chose us and sanctified us out of all nations, and with love and intent you invested with us your holy Shabbat. Blessed are you, Adonai, sanctifier of Shabbat. Good? Okay, so on balance, if we try to bring all of this together of what we're supposed to be feeling on Shabbat, this is taken from various selections of our texts. In the Torah, in the prophetic writings, and in the writings, that is to say, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the three parts of the Bible, we find the Sabbath is weighed in the balance opposite all of the other commandments in the Torah. Right? There are examples in all three parts of the Bible where Shabbat and everything else are put on a balance, and Shabbat is as important as everything else, which is a huge, huge thing to say about any mitzvah, any of the commandments. Right? So in the Torah, what do we hear? How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? And it is written in that same section, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you bread for 2 days. So because in the first half of that conversation, God is talking about all of his commandments, and then in the next verse, he's talking about Shabbat. Shabbat is being held parallel to all the commandments. If we're breaking Shabbat, it's like we're breaking everything else. Right? Shabbat has a huge spiritual significance for us. In the prophets, but the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not walk in my statutes, and my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. Again, that's someone at the door? Let me go check, because that's way late for students.
Yeah, we're kind of halfway. Oh.
Okay. Important business, but back to this important business.
Yes.
So again, taken this time from the prophet Ezekiel, the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not walk in my statutes, my laws, and my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. Again, all of the other laws are treated as one big bunch, but Shabbat is singled out as being equal when we didn't do Shabbat properly. So it's drawing a parallel again. And then in writings, in Ketuvim, this time taken from Nehemiah, you came down upon Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven and gave them right ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments, and you made known to them your holy Shabbat. Again, all of the other laws on one side, and Shabbat is mentioned specifically. It really sets up this idea of how important we feel Shabbat is. It's not just an extra bonus day off. It's not just a weekend. Shabbat is really one of the keys to understanding and feeling Judaism. Unfortunately, because Shabbat comes every week, a lot of people treat it as though it was common in the sense that doesn't need to be given special attention. You know, people will come for Rosh Hashanah, but not come for Shabbat. People will come from Yom Kippur, but not for Shabbat. People will be very, very, devoted to being fair and honest in their business, but Shabbat, not so important. People will be very committed to doing tzedakah and helping others in need, but Shabbat, meh. Partly because it is always there. And so we can easily say, I'll do it next week. I'll do it next week. I'll do it next week. And next week never happens.
Never happened.
Okay. Which is one of the things we have to remember, though, on Shabbat that is trying to tell us this is that this is this bonus time, right? Shabbat is not about limits. It's about being given more. And one of the ways you remember that is from the story of the manna, the food that God gave us in the wilderness, right? Rabbi Abba said, and on Shabbat, one is obligated to break over 2 loaves. What is the reason? Twice as much bread. What is he talking about? He's saying that when the manna was given, we got double manna on Friday so that Shabbat, we wouldn't have to go out and gather. And that double portion of manna is why you'll always see whenever we do the motzi here for the bread, we've got 2 loaves of bread, right? It's reminding ourselves of the double portion. And we do that for the Friday night meal, for the Saturday day meal, and for the Saturday afternoon meal. We make sure we've got double portion all around. Or as the Shulchan Aruch said, one breaks bread on 2 whole loaves that one holds, then you eat from the lower one. This is in the evening, but in the day and on other holidays, one takes from the upper loaf. This is according to the Kabbalah. So you may notice that in many communities, they'll hold the 2 loaves like this.
Uh-huh.
And on Friday night, they'll eat from the top loaf. There, we have our visitor. They'll eat from the top loaf.
Uh-huh.
And then on Saturday day, they'll eat from the bottom loaf. And what Rabbi Joseph Caro is hinting at here is that, hi,
Hi, Rachel.
yes, are you,
I'm here for the class.
Okay.
I called last week
yes,
and they say the class will be at 7 o'clock.
no, class is at 6 o'clock, but you're welcome to join us for the last few minutes.
Oh my God. Oh,
It's okay. Luckily, it's recorded online, so you can always catch up.
oh,
But yeah, the class is at 6 o'clock, 6 to 7 on Thursdays. I'm sorry someone gave you the wrong information.
oh, it's okay, don't worry.
If you ever have any other questions about scheduling or anything like that, just contact me directly. My email is rabbi@tiflorida.org. That's the quickest way to get to the source for the answers.
Oh, okay.
Sorry for any confusion.
That's okay.
So as I was saying, in the Kabbalah, they try to think about Shabbat as being this special reunification of the bride, of the Kala.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, we want to represent the bride as well as the more masculine image of Shabbat. Holding the 2 lobes like this, the bride is on the bottom and the masculine is on the top. And so Friday night, where there's a heavier emphasis on the bridal aspect of Shabbat, we eat from the bottom loaf. And then when there's a heavier emphasis on God as sort of powerful king, on Saturday, we eat from the top loaf. Now, you may notice my own custom, because I'm not officially a Kabbalist by any definition. My own custom is to hold the 2 loaves side by side. But I will still eat from the loaf that is connected to the bride and the loaf that is connected to the masculine on the different days. That's why we eat from the different loaves on Friday night versus Saturday morning. But that's a custom. It's not a requirement.
Okay. Interesting. I didn't know that.
Okay, and we get a few more bonuses on this oneg thing. And this is especially when you are at home and you are in a family setting. If you're a bachelor, obviously you're not going to be worried about blessing your children. But we do a blessing for our children. We'll place our hands on their head and we will use the priestly blessing. But we begin first by, if it's a girl, we'll say, may God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And if it is a boy, we'll say, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. The matriarchs really don't need much more explanation of why we would choose to say, we hope God will bless you the way he blessed them. Ephraim and Manasseh, most people are not as familiar with why we would be pointing to them. So there's 2 reasons. One, they were very successful, right? The tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh were the most materially successful of all the tribes. But more importantly in the story of Genesis is the idea, A, that Jacob says we will use them as the source, as a reference for blessing. But also when Jacob blesses the younger more than the elder, right? And reversing what should be their preference by being in birth order, the two boys don't complain. And they are the first two siblings in the entire Bible up to this point, the very end of Genesis, that haven't complained when the parents treat them differently, right? All the other kids, from Cain and Abel, first two siblings we know, all the way through from Joseph and his brothers, anytime the parents treat the kids differently, there's fighting. Ephraim and Manasseh get a different blessing each, and they don't fight. They don't argue. They don't complain. And that really is what we hope, is that people will recognize that you're not always going to get exactly the same as the guy next to you, but being brothers, you should only want what's best for each other and not fight over it. Now, we'll also do Eshet Chayil, which is the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, which literally kind of gets translated as a woman of valor, a heroic woman, or an accomplished woman. And it's a list of all of the amazing things that a woman can do. Traditionally, this is recited by the husband to his wife. But even if you're not married, many people have the belief that we should say this even still. But the woman that we are referring to then is Torah, that we use that as a metaphor for Torah as being our partner. And that meaning should be then used as well. And finally, we finish with one of the most famous quotes from a modern Jewish author, Ahad Ha'am, who says, "More than the Jewish people have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people." That yes, we protect and we watch over Shabbat and we make sure we do it right and celebrate it with joy and honor and all of the other things, more of which we'll talk about next week. But because we do that, Shabbat has continued to be a huge bonus and benefit for us in our life, and to almost shield us. Once a week, we get this special little cocoon of time and spirituality that for the last 2,000 years especially was absolutely essential. When you are fighting against all of the trouble in the world and all of the difficulties you have just making enough to eat, having this one day when you can be with your family, be allowed to be more spiritual because you have the time, enjoy everything that you've already been able to accomplish, it refreshes you, which is the literal meaning of the earlier words that God uses for why he gave us Shabbat, is that this will reignite our soul in a way that constant work every day and never checking what we're doing, never feeling anything more than just, I have to. We get burnt out. We would no longer truly be fully human. And so Shabbat has really helped make the Jewish people endure for thousands and thousands of years. So yes, we keep Shabbat, but Shabbat keeps us too. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, and for your benefit as well, next week we'll be going over the restriction parts. Right? This week we covered all of the bonus things we do on Shabbat, the extra meal, the having the kiddush with the wine, having the extra bread for our meal, the special blessings we do, and all of the things that we do to make ourselves look better and feel better on Shabbat. Next week, all of the things we do to clear the way for Shabbat, all of the stuff we stop doing. As you probably remember from just reading the Bible at any other point, it says not to do work on Shabbat. Work is a slippery term. And so thankfully, our sages, by careful reading of the Torah, are able to tell us what counts as work and what doesn't. And that definition is very important, because if each person's left to their own, we would never stop working. We'd keep saying, oh no, it's not really work if I just check my business email. It's not really work if I just pay a couple bills. It's just a couple clicks. And yes, that counts as work. I can tell you as a heads up for next week, that's not what you want to be doing on Shabbat. So that's just a little preview, but we're finished. If you have any other questions about the positive celebratory aspects of Shabbat, we can handle them now, or you can.
Yes, I have a small booklet
Mm-hmm.
that because I'm by myself, I'm the only one who celebrates it at home. But
I remember what that was like for.
so I'm just like curious to know, can you, because I have this little booklet that tells you step by step everything, and all the songs, the prayers, and
many different songs. Yes.
Okay. Do I have to do it? Because
You don't have to do every song. No.
Every song,
The
but I can
songs
just
are for your
read it.
choice, and you can certainly just read,
Uh-huh.
as well. The songs are there because we like singing. We're human.
Yes.
And many different songs have been written over the last few thousand years, or many parts of the Bible have been turned into songs, right? Even if they were only one or two sentences. But the main things that we do on Shabbat that we have to do, we've covered, right? So we light the candles.
Yes.
We say the Kiddush. We do the blessing over the challah, the 2 loaves of bread. And those are the main home things that we do. We have our own service, which we'll also cover in a future class. And we, of course, have we have the regular Shabbat evening service, and we also have the Shabbat morning service. And there's a Shabbat afternoon service, and there's a Havdalah service. But as far as like the Friday night part, which is what most people are doing just by themselves, those are the main elements that we have, right? The lighting the candles, the saying the Kiddush, the doing the blessing over the bread, I switched off the page, doing the blessing for children if you have them, doing the blessed of Eshet Chayil as well, from the book of Proverbs, and then doing something else that will help make the day happy and glad. Some people will sing around their table, others people will do Torah study and discussion around the table, and even on your own, you can still, study if that makes you happier than singing. Depends on how much you enjoy the sound of your own voice.
But after that, you can do, like always, you do your after meals.
There's the blessing after the meal, Birkat Hamazon, yes.
Yes.
That, and there are a few additional pieces that we add when it's Shabbat. That's different than what we would do if it was Tuesday.
Okay.
But the basic structure is still the same. We just add a couple extra pieces. And if you bring in the one, I can point it out to it if you can't find it.
I will bring it to you.
But double check, because it usually will say for Shabbat or on Shabbat, and those are the parts that you add in.
Okay.
And then also for the blessing after the meal, if it's Hanukkah, there's another part we add in, or if it's Purim coming up soon, there's another part we add in. So if it's a holiday or any special day, usually there's something that gets added in, because we always want to just be mindful of what we've got and what's happening that time.
Yep.
Anything else? Good. Okay. Then that will conclude it for tonight.
Thank you very much.